Good morning, everyone. I'm Ajahn Cunda, Pacific Hermitage, and it's a nice cool morning here. Some rain, which is definitely needed right now. And I hope everyone is enjoying their weather as well. Or if not, it's giving some sort of pleasant result, such as allowing all the living things to continue to live. Yesterday I was actually a couple of days ago. I've been kind of thinking about daily life practice and how we often divide our practice off into times that we are able to be mindful, times that we're not. And as most of you know, we are encouraging ourselves to be mindful, to be present with understanding the Dhamma at every waking moment when we're not asleep. And that's not a easy thing to do. So for many of us, when we're doing formal practice, like sitting in meditation, that can feel like, oh yeah, this is the true Dhamma practice. Or we're doing walking meditation or standing, lying down, whatever posture we're in, but we're actually deliberately setting aside some time to be quiet, often close our eyes. This seems like the real work. And then often through distraction, we are not necessarily attuned to this presence that we have when we're in our formal meditation practices, or our experiences when we've actually closed our eyes or we're focusing in such a way, just because the nature of activity tends to spin one out, and the mind isn't able to stay with a particular object as easily. But our training is the way of our training is focused on our being able to actually bring our minds to a steadiness and a focus, whether we're formally practicing or not. And so most of us know that, but it's just a very important thing to reflect and to bring up for ourselves. I was thinking about the other day, we have different responsibilities. Many of us do different things that we just have to take care of, and there's possibly thousands of these things throughout the day that we're doing, and a lot of them have become habitual, and others are not so habitual, and so we can sometimes slide into making mistakes or doing things. And I was reflecting on that in terms of how we maintain our practice during these activities, and also when we do make mistakes. The other day, we have trash to take out here, just like any other place, and here we do that once a month. So as you can imagine, we don't generate too much trash. We just have a medium-sized trash can, and that's put out once a month. But if it's not put out, then it can be a frustrating experience for having forgotten that. So I've been pretty diligently taking care of that since I've been here. And I do certain things like leave myself a note, because it's just a once a month activity. I'll make sure I take the garbage out from the smaller garbage inside the house and pack it up, put it in the garbage bin, pull out the bin. But because there's bears, we don't put the garbage out the night before, because the bears will, it's not too frequent of a thing, but bears have come around and opened the trash, and they've also messed with our internet, stuff like that. So anyway, I pulled the trash can out the other day, put it in the front of the house, and left a note for myself in the house, and then went back to my kuti. And I also pulled out as I said, pulled out the bag that was in the house. And giving you a lot of detail here, but I woke up at the regular time, fairly early in the morning, kind of just was diligent doing my thing, and then around 9 a.m., a fair amount of time had passed, and 9 a.m. I thought, oh, I forgot to take out the trash, which is supposed to go out at 7. Of course, the first thing that came to mind was, what about the other monks that I live with? They're sort of newly arrived. They've been here about 4 weeks now. But I never told them about this trash thing. And in fact, the note that I left inside the house, not in my kuti, just said that I was going to do this. It was a note for myself. So they left it there, and which is completely fine. They don't have any knowledge. And as well, I left a note saying I would do it. So around 9 a.m., I kind of felt quite upset. And I was thinking about this, like, what was that? Like, all of a sudden, I was immediately in a bad mood. I was just chastising myself, and, of course, then thought when I walked out of my kuti and then came to the house, the garbage was still there, and thought, why didn't these monks think of this if they saw it? And so then the blame comes up, and then I bring the trash over, which is it's a few minutes walk to get to the end of the driveway, very long driveway, and I'm mumbling to myself and kind of thinking, this was stupid. How did I forget this? And then there was a woman by the pond area, which is 100 feet or so away from the house, and a couple 100 feet away, and she was saying how lovely it was to come over and just sit by the pond. And I kind of mumbled something to her. I'm happy for you, or something like that. Anyway, that didn't quite brighten my day. And I bring the trash over to the end of the driveway, and I leave it there, kind of thinking, I think they already came, it's 9 o'clock, and needed to get it out 2 hours earlier. And so it was just this kind of bad mood that I just stayed in. And then I walked back, and I saw the other 2 monks we had somehow crisscrossed paths, and they had already come into the to the house, and yeah, just this mood had settled in, and I was just reflecting on how that how pervasive that can become, just some small incident, and all of what was going through my head, now I'm gonna have to wait another month, and the garbage wasn't full, but I'm gonna get 2 months now in, and then the chastising began of myself. And I also noticed something I tend to do is I immediately said this to the other monk, said, oh yeah, I forgot the trash. And looking at that, like what is the reason to kind of say something like that? It didn't seem like that important to share. Was I looking for support? Was I looking for them to blame me, or whatever it was? And so I was just reflecting on this sense of self that we have and how we can carry that around. And for me, that was what was present in this situation. It was this sense that I had forgotten something. I had made a mistake. How could I be so incompetent? I'm a pretty together person. I handle all these other things around the house and take care of things. And on these kind of thoughts went. And again, this goes back to this sort of mindless wandering that can occur. And then when one's not careful, and I was mentioning, like, it was a kind of very negative reaction I had internally, but there was a mood that was going on that was quite negative. And of course, with enough mindfulness, one can kind of just be with that, and then watch the arising and ceasing, and there's the possibility of seeing more clearly and not letting that mood influence one. And so that kind of self arising, and that challenging of who and what I am, and what I'm supposed to be, and how I'm supposed to be, and I don't do these things, or I can't make mistakes. All of these things kind of came up, and they were. I think it was that painfulness, that kind of second arrow that I kept, and third and fourth and fifth that I was shooting myself with, that was causing so much of these problems. And so I was kind of trying to get, centered around that, and I was around the other monks at the time, and then one of them came up to me and said, you know, I noticed that there was no bag in the garbage this morning, like it had been pulled out, the one inside the house, and I just think, if someone's going to take out the bag, they should replace it with a new bag. And so, being in the mood I was in, I was needing to restrain myself, and yeah, I had to reflect for a moment. I had to kind of just kind of sense, okay, I'm in a bad mood right now, and maybe this kind of feedback isn't so great. But I managed to kind of say, yeah, it's true what you're saying. Yeah, whoever takes out the trash from the smaller garbage can inside the house should hopefully replace that bag. Obviously, that was something else. So there was another mistake, and another challenge, and another kind of, I'm incompetent. How did this happen? This is not who I am. On and on. The sankharas go. But I did, unfortunately or fortunately, I said, well, but there's also another alternative, I said to this other monk, I said, if you see that the bag isn't there, you can replace it. And I think that's perfectly fine. Or just let me know how you're doing, for example, or how that I've missed this or whatever, as you're doing right now. But that's another alternative, or to even do that, like to also maybe not mention something. That's another way, because then I might see, oh, I didn't replace that bag, and then I learn in that way. But I did feel as if, like, what parents must feel towards their kids a lot, because what was coming up in mind in this kind of negativity was, my goodness, like, I look after these monks so much, and I and in particular, when I see things around, where we live, that are left undone, very similarly to the garbage bag being left in there, I tend to clean it up, but I don't say anything. And I'd like to say something, but I try to actually just say, like, well, maybe they'll see that this has happened, and I'm not saying that the other monks who I've lived with don't look after themselves or don't clean up, but this is just an effect of living with others, that we tend to take care of each other, and in some cases, some people need more of that than others. And what's important is not to allow that to build up, frustration or anger around this. Resentment can arise. So it's interesting, like, yeah, and I think about, like, how my parents, my mom, or any family members have had to deal with this, growing up, the kind of child or the kids who are resistant to things, or they don't see that their parents are looking after them, or they want to kind of mention that thing that a particular parent didn't do. Yeah. So that's sorry to my parents, my mom, and everything as of now. But I just kind of think about that, like, how we go about our daily experience, and how it can easily spin out. So with such a flow, and sort of with that lack of mindfulness, we're not able to catch these things. And so in recognizing that, I think what I found is very helpful is just to not try to carry around an attitude that my formal meditation practice is where this work is, and it's really what we're doing that's so important, like every day in our daily activities. And so we want to try to catch ourselves. We want to try to have, like find these things funny, try to humor ourselves around them, have a sense of lightness around it. And in a way, it's important to really kind of identify, oh, like here's where I keep going wrong or I keep spinning off. Like, and what is this attitude, these sort of ways that we repeat to ourselves around, like, I can't make mistakes, I shouldn't make mistakes, I'm a competent person, I don't make mistakes. It's other people who make mistakes, not me. And so we solidify this sense of self, and then we create this dukkha that rapidly kind of goes out of control, because we're not able to catch it, and we can fall into a bad mood. I just can imagine if I trace that experience back to the moment I realized that I hadn't, it was 2 hours late, I hadn't taken garbage out, and just, okay, hold on, wait a moment, just stay with this moment right now. The experience is dukkha, there's this bad mood that immediately has arisen, and and rather than kind of going into all of the usual thoughts and tyrannical effects that those have, then I can kind of just be with that and just take the garbage out, and there's no problem. And I was reflecting even while it was happening, I was saying, it's not a big deal. I'll figure out what to do with the extra garbage, or we don't generate that much garbage. I could probably compress it, and it might not even be noticeable after 2 months. It might just be the right amount for one bin. So these kind of things came up, and it's still like the negative emotion was what was spinning and spinning. And that's, I think, sometimes the problem is we're not able to be with negativity so easily, or when it comes and throws us off guard, it's hard for us to stay with that and say, like, okay, that's right. Like, this practice isn't about not feeling the unpleasant, or just feeling pleasant. It's about being present with that and knowing that we don't have to suffer around it. So there was just kind of a lot of Dhamma has that effect. If we're able to pay attention and look at it, it can have quite a beautiful effect in terms of showing us our own minds, especially in these kind of slightly difficult situations. I don't want to call this very difficult, because it wasn't a problem in the end. I mean, most things aren't. And I could imagine just like how, dealing with being in a war-torn country, or, extreme famine, or losing people, violence, right in front of us or happening to us. I think there can be just a mode of course, we just are forced to deal with it. And sometimes we can't even, these situations are so extreme that the potential to actually pay attention and to understand the Dhamma isn't even possible sometimes. People just maybe not, they might be pressed up against circumstances that are so incredibly extreme that there's not a way to really comprehend or understand the Dhamma. So also, again, as I've mentioned before, looking at the privilege we have to not live in certain situations like that, or if we do, the little time that we can reflect on Dhamma. I mean, these are all potentials for us. But even just this sort of innocuous experience that I had, how we can use it to teach ourselves, and then say, oh, okay, I was kind of thrown off guard there. What was the better way to be able to handle this situation so that the negative mood it didn't affect me as much? And of course, as we're paying attention, we see that it's not it helps us to not only understand our reactivity to a negative mood, but it also helps us to see, well, how did this all start? It started because I've fabricated a lot of experiences for myself that have led to a self-image, or a sense of self that had to be reinforced in one way or another. So again, like, just my reaction was around that sense that I had done something wrong, and all of the expectations I have around that. rather than just be aware of my particular experience. And I'm backtracking from that, saying that all of those times that I've reinforced that self and reinforced these sankharas by kind of buying into them, bringing them up, thinking, they've caused the result that I had. And so we can see the fruit of our practice is not only in establishing the importance of this formal practice that we do, but also just the informal times are just as important. But they're informing each other. They're part of each other. So the more present we are able to be with our formal practice, then that, of course, allows us to be very present with what's going on in our day-to-day activity. And then how we are with our day-to-day activity allows us to see clearly into the Dhamma when we're practicing formally, but it also kind of smooths out that formal practice. So we're constantly needing to take care of that. Having to look at, how we're doing in both senses, and essentially kind of try to stop dividing up the times when we think we're able to be mindful and we're not, or we think what's best for us, or how we're doing things, best for us in terms of like, well, that's when I can really meditate or concentrate or keep my mind focused, is when I'm sitting down, closing my eyes. I remember once a woman at Baigiri told me that she often wanted to be in the kitchen, and I was intrigued by this. And she said, well, the kitchen allows me to really see where my Dhamma practice is. It's where my buttons get pressed and I can really process the Dhamma. Because when I'm sitting in meditation, it's just sort of calm and it's fairly easy. Not all of us can say the same thing about formal practice being easy, but her sense that being in an adverse situation really helps us to see and wake up to the possibilities we have of seeing the Dhamma right here and right now. One of Lumpur Cha's two teachers, I'm forgetting which one of them said this, but he was walking on alms round one time, and he noticed that there was this one house that didn't offer. It was the one house in the village didn't offer food, and he kept walking by, and I think he knew that the family was Buddhist. It was and so there was a man who he'd interacted with, and in this household he saw this man one day when he was on alms round, and I think he intimated, or he said directly, that the man was stingy. He wasn't. He wasn't. They don't. There's not always a lot given in villages like this, especially at the time. This was probably over 60 or 70 years ago. So a small amount of rice could be given, and that's that's enough, just like a small ball of rice. And so this monk was fairly wise, and he thought this was the time to do this, and it was appropriate. And there's a lot of faith for the laity in Thailand who see monks every day, and so this man, though, he released a tyrant of kind of words and things that were not very beautiful, and he was really laying into this monk. And the monk just said to himself, the Dhamma has arisen. You can imagine in this situation, someone's kind of yelling at you, and you might want to yell back or say something back, but he just realized, like, this is the Dhamma right here. His own experience within and his ability to be able to deal with it at the time. So I don't think he continued to get into it with this man. But after this series of unkind words, he just left, and he just contemplated the Dhamma, and he tried to understand from his own heart, what the reaction was. So if we can do that as in terms of seeing adversity and just saying, oh yeah, I forgot the trash, the Dhamma has arisen, um, or I'm being told, in this sort of negative mood that I'm in, that I should replace the bag in the trash and shouldn't be so mindless. So this is very helpful. It's very helpful for us to just kind of look into our hearts whenever we're experiencing our day-to-day activities as much as we can, and when there's especially minor or major difficulty, we can just say, oh, the Dhamma has arisen. This is the Dhamma. When we suffer, we start shooting those second arrows at ourselves, and we don't see that clearly, and or we say, well, I don't have time for this, I'll meditate later. It's hard to really process the Dhamma if we're not willing to see it. And so we can have that attitude. Just we're arguing with somebody, or we've done something that was a mistake that was kind of we think is really stupid, proportionally usually isn't. And we just say the Dhamma has arisen. This is what's possible now, is to see how I'm suffering, and to have enough wisdom to say, like, well, I don't want to add to it. So how can I experience this and understand how to quell that dukkha, to release it? Because often it comes back to this desire. I'd rather be alone. I don't want to be a person who forgets things, whatever it might be, where we're wanting something we're not getting. And this is the discontent that we experience. So at the end of the day, I went back to go get the full garbage can. And I think I had also confirmed with the monks, when we see the truck, or when we hear the truck or whatever, or on alms round when the truck passes the monks. And so yeah, it's definitely gone. Oh well. So is it? I think they come around 8 or something like that, between 7 and 8. Anyway, I go up and I'm thinking to myself, create an expectation that there's going to be bags in the garbage, so you don't have to feel anything when you see it, so it's not a problem. And so I get to the garbage can, and I see it from a little bit afar, and it's actually upside down, which I thought, that's not so great. But then I got to see that the lid was also upside down on the ground next to it with a rock in it. So I thought, well, don't jump to conclusions here. It's not necessarily empty. Maybe there's still bags in an inverted can, or the bags have flown all over the road, because I couldn't see the road from where I was. So you're going to arrive, and there's going to be bags everywhere, and whatever. Of course, I arrive, the garbage is upside down with the lid next to it, and there's no garbage bags in it. So, that's just how things work. And immediately the mood that I had, or the lingering effects of that, lifted, and I smiled and laughed, and I kind of thought, okay, it's important to have a good sense of humor. It's important to just be like, okay, this is funny. And I also thought about how I might have had a negative attitude if I saw maybe that the garbage was being taken at like noon or 1 o'clock on another day. Oh, these garbage men, don't they just have a consistent time that they come? And we don't know. We just don't know what things are, why we're going to be elated about something or not elated about something else, or complain about something that really isn't healthy or worth it to complain about, or it might just be something that aids us later on. A late garbage man or woman coming and picking up the trash that we put out late. Although possibly maybe it was just a good Samaritan who came by and checked and put the trash in their own car. I don't know. So, yeah, I think we have everything there. Anicca, impermanence, not knowing, not being sure, and that self process that occurs for us, and just the dukkha. And the more that we're able to see that in our own experience, then without getting kind of caught up in it and spun out and you know, involved in a way that's causing us more problems, then we're not able to kind of clearly see, and this is where we don't have the potential for wisdom to arise. And in this example that I've given, there's a lot of nuances to it, but it's just a simple kind of day-to-day thing. I mean, how often do we forget something? This happened to be irksome, I think, because it's a once-a-month deal, and if you miss it, you miss it for a month. But just that the way that it's held, the way that these attitudes are held, and then we bring them in, and they can cause a lot of distress and discontent and suffering for us. I think it's so helpful to kind of look at that and see how it is so easy for us to compound matters just by our lack of being able to pay attention and allowing the mind to kind of do its thing when it comes to just the identification we have with our khandhas, our minds, our bodies, and how it is that we experience things. And I would guess I'm not alone in these kind of activities that we engage in, the mistakes that we make. And I think it's important to look at the question of why we don't think, for example, that we can allow ourselves to make mistakes. One of the things I love from Ajahn Cunda is how he says, if you aren't willing to make mistakes, you really aren't willing to learn, because you can't learn without making mistakes. That's where learning comes from. It doesn't usually come from kind of happenstance getting things right. It comes from getting things wrong. And so it's funny how much we identify with this wrongness rather than see it again like, oh, the Dhamma has risen. I can do something with this. I can use this as a learning experience. And sadly enough, what we do learn is how to chastise ourselves, or how to feel negative, or be in a bad mood, possibly longer than we need to be. And that's just because of that sense of like what it means to have something, wrong happen to us. And I would say like quote unquote wrong, because it's never really wrong, is it? It's sort of, we can look at it as right. Whatever's happening, it's going to teach us if we allow it. If we don't allow it, then we're just going to kind of have lost that potential to have used what was in our experience to wake up and to see things from a different lens and a different understanding. So that's an encouragement this morning and a reflection, just to see how we can try to use the Dhamma in every situation, and try to understand even when it is that we don't want to understand or we don't want to be with our experience, and also to see how beneficial it can be. For example, all of that story making I was bringing up, and then it amounted to everything that I believed was wrong was actually it was right. The main thing was the bags, the garbage wasn't taken out in time, and what was in the garbage wasn't going to be. I'd have to wait another month, and then in the end that didn't happen. So a very small event, but a very good one in terms of being able to try to utilize my own understanding of the Dhamma, and seeing, where I can try to catch the mind from getting into the same patterns, and then seeing where it does, and oh, okay, this is a particular movement of mind that isn't quite helpful. And then trying to see what is helpful. So if any of you have any questions about that, I'm happy to see if I can answer them. So Shelley asks, how do we know then that we are being mindful or not beforehand while the trash is forgotten, while the trash is being forgotten? That's a good question. So, yeah, well, it's interesting. Before we forget about something, right? So something's in the mind, right? We have to hold a lot of responsibilities that we have in our mind, and we often do. And that's why I wrote a note for myself, but I put it in the wrong place. I didn't put it in my kuti, which is where I would have clearly seen it. And so that's a way that I particularly try to help myself remember something, because there are so many things that we have to remember during the day. But it's possible that if I wasn't being as if I was more focused in the morning, if I wasn't distracted, possibly, I'm not sure what I was distracted that particular time, but I was going through a daily routine, and again, it's sort of like, well, this was a once a month one-off event, and it just escaped the mind. So we know when we're being mindful when we have the skillful things that we are doing in our lives. We're remembering them. We're bringing them up. They're part of our perception, our sanya, our experience. So it's not like I'm kind of having to say the same thing over and over to myself. Remember the garbage. Remember the garbage. Remember the garbage. It's more that it's there. So mindfulness is present when we're aware of also the things that we're supposed to be doing. And interestingly enough, that's a particular aspect of what I see as sampajanya, or clear knowing, clear seeing, clear understanding, as opposed to just mindfulness without that. So sati can allow me to stay in the present moment, right? I can stay with what I'm doing, what's happening, right in that present moment. A breath in, a breath out, whatever it might be. But sampajanya, which is paired with sati, right? Mindfulness and full comprehension, or mindfulness and clear comprehension, those are always paired together. In fact, when we talk about mindfulness, usually we're including sampajanya. And sampajanya is that kind of knowing what we're doing while we're doing it, or knowing kind of like the bigger picture. It's the bigger kind of sense of what's happening. So without sampajanya, then I could say that I was possibly very mindful that morning, or I had sati. My mind was able to stay with possibly what I was doing at the time, even for several hours. But without sampajanya, without clear knowing, then things can get forgotten or lost. And again, it's not a sense of having to repeat things to oneself, but one has it in one's mind, the responsibilities that we have and that we have to deal with. I think that's a function of mindfulness. That's a function of sampajanya and sati sampajanya. And that's what allows us to know that we're being mindful, is we have these things in mind. We know what we're doing next. And I think most of us are very aware that when we have a lot of that sampajanya, sati sampajanya built up, we're very clear with what it is we're doing. And sometimes we can even be clear about what other people are doing, and how they're have forgotten something or not. I'm not just saying in terms of evidence of having seen it, but actually we can, like, in a moment be like, oh, remember you're supposed to do such and such, and so mostly we don't want to get into too much pointing that out for other people, but sometimes we need to. Sometimes we need to encourage each other and let each other know when we're being mindful or not, when another person isn't. But it can kind of get annoying for other people if we're always pointing in a particular way, even if we're right, if we're particularly right. And Holly mentioned the famous quote by Mark Twain, "I spend much of my life worrying about problems I never really had." That's I think that's a paraphrase, yeah. I think he says it. I can't remember exactly the way he says it, but it's an excellent quote. Because that's we often do. It's like the garbage wasn't going to be empty, and this carried over for quite a while during the day until I went to go get it, and this wasn't a problem I really had, and it didn't even need to be a problem I needed to carry around to begin with, even if I was wrong and the trash wasn't taken out. So yes, that's a excellent quote, Ollie. Thank you. Right, in looking at a cascade of effects, how we have to be very careful when several things occur to us that are difficult, or it's just one after the other, an event occurs, and it's harder. It gets harder. It's like falling down a slope, and we can't find our purchase, and then we can get spun out of control or not. As I mentioned, it's not easier to be able to react. So we, in a way that's skillful. So if we can kind of catch ourselves before these events are occurring, or we're not mindful around any of them, then they have much less of a negative effect on us. And yes, as I had mentioned, and as Kaido mentioned, having a good sense of humor. I think I recently was listening to a statistic around how when we're kids, we laugh about, I think it was something like an average of 300 times a day. But by the time we're in our mid-20s, that's not even in a month. It's only like once or twice a day is the average. And so we don't even get close to that sense of humor we have as a child. In a month, we don't even get close to what they do in a day. And I think it's interesting to look at that. Like, what is a sense that we can have of carrying things a little bit more lightly? That's what this sense of the Dhamma has arisen is also. It's also an encouragement towards that, towards trying to have, a sense of humor around things, not to take things so personally, not to take things so seriously. I am not sure how many of you remember Wavy Gravy, who I think is still alive, but he was the MC at Woodstock, and he eventually opened up a camp called Camp Win a Rainbow, and it's actually for it's a camp that's fairly well endowed, and it takes on a lot of kids who don't have the opportunities to go to a camp, and so these are like just children from fairly poor families, and I don't think anyway I believe they probably have a policy of accepting as many kids as they can. And one of the things about this camp is that they, their board, actually, their board meetings, Wavy Gravy said that during their board meetings, if anybody uses the word serious, then they have to wear a clown nose. Just after one mention, they have to wear a clown nose for the rest of the meeting. And so he has these little red clown noses that people put on their noses, and they have to interact with the other board members for the rest of the time, just if they use that word. So you imagine, well, this is really serious. Oh, sorry. And I'm sure it lightens the air quite a bit. So we can try to think about that figuratively to ourselves, like when we have a moment of just taking ourselves way too seriously, or or not having a sense of humor, just kind of figuratively putting our clown nose on, and that helps a little bit, helps take us out of our perception of self and who and what we think we are. So there are, sure, you can ask a question, Cisco, not related to the topic, that's fine. And I will just say that M wrote, is there a school in Theravada that teaches a type of meditation similar to Shikantasa, as taught by Dogen Zenji, silent illumination? I don't know what silent illumination is, so I'm not sure. But the Buddha taught many meditation techniques, so and he was open to a lot of meditation techniques. So as Ajahn Chah would write or speak about, when, for example, Lumpur Sumedho asked him, he was using I think it was a Zen approach with his meditation at the time when he first met Ajahn Chah, which is to ask himself, who am I? And he would say that over and over again in his meditation. And then he would just be with the results of that, whatever his mind would come up with. And it wasn't like to necessarily have something every time he said that, but it was just there would be sort of a space or pause for that to occur each time he'd answer the question, and there would be an answer he'd have, and then he'd ask himself again, who am I? And Ajahn Chah, one might think, would refuse that, kind of say no, get back to the breath. But he didn't. He said, well, how's that working for you? What are the results? And Lumpur Sumedho said, well, they're quite good, actually. I'm gaining a lot of insight from that practice. And Ajahn Chah said, good. Keep going. Keep working. If it's moving in a good direction for you and giving you good results, then keep trying it. So just to answer M there, if you try silent illumination and you find it's helpful for yourself, whatever that is, then then if the results are good, if you're gaining wisdom, your suffering is being understood and decreased, then keep doing it. Well, there could be more questions, but I think it looks like it's a pretty good time to stop here, since it's been a little bit more than 45 minutes. If anybody would like to ask another question, you can either write them to the Pacific Hermitage, hermitage@abhayagiri.org. And I'm not going to spell all that out, but if you want to find it out, you can look online at our website. Or you can just try to remember your question and post it next time. And that will be Tuesday, which is our next event coming up. That'll be at 6:30 p.m. And I just wanted to remind people that it'll be a slightly different venue on Tuesday. It'll start at 6:30 and we'll do a half hour in a meditation. We'll be in a different location. I'll be in a yoga studio at Yoga Samadhi. And so 6:30 to 7 meditation, 7 to 7:15, 7:30 have a reflection, and then whatever time is left until 8 p.m. we'll have a question and answer. And this will all be on YouTube, and you can still post questions on YouTube. Please try to stick to practice questions if you can, rather than esoteric, questions that might not apply to your actual practice. That is all I have for you, so I wish you all a good day and a good morning. And don't forget to take out the garbage. But if you do, it's okay. Things will come around.